Today I'm going to be watching, this video is called 19 Weird Things Swedish People Do. So that in itself is interesting, but this actually says that you should do too. So yeah, I'm really interested to know what parts of Swedish life and being Swedish other people should follow. 19 weird things Swedish people do. So this should be interesting. Tell me if you do any of these things. Tell me what you think about them. Tell me if you think other people should do them too. Let's check out.
Hey everyone, I hope you are doing amazingly. Today I'm going to share the craziest, most wonderful and best Swedish traditions that I think you should try too. From how we cut our pizza, to how we raise our children, to how we sleep, here are some of my favorite Swedish traditions that I think everyone in the whole entire world should do. So let's get started. We cut our pizza with scissors. This is also a minimalist hack because you no longer need to use a silly pizza cutter that you literally cannot use for anything. Instead, just use your kitchen scissors to cut pizza. Cutting pizza is such an easy and fun way to slice pizza.
I mean, I've actually did that before when I couldn't find my pizza cutter. So that is fair enough, but that's the normal way. It is kind of interesting. Where did that actually come from? I guess the minimalist lifestyle that she mentioned is a big part of it, but yeah, I guess it just makes sense. The only problem is when you have to lift the full pizza, is it damage the pizza in any way by lifting it up and having to cut through it? I guess the pizza roller, you don't actually need to touch other people's pieces of pizza as well. Don't know, tell me if you do that.
One of my favorite hacks for a happy marriage and a Swedish tradition that I grew up with is to have separate duvets. Having separate duvets makes so much more sense. It is so much more comfortable. You never have to fight with your partner over a blanket, and it just makes a world of difference. If you have one duvet, it's big and bulky and it's crazy. Just try 2 duvets and see if it makes you feel any better.
I mean, that is a good idea. I'm going to go one step further and say what I actually do. Me and my wife sleep in separate bedrooms. Not because we don't like each other, because we live in Malaysia and she likes to sleep in very cold temperatures. So she likes to have the aircon, the fan on and be very cold. I can't sleep that. I have to be very warm. So I sleep in a different room in a separate bed with no aircon, no fan. It works perfectly for both of us. We both get a great night's sleep rather than one of us being uncomfortable. It just works. Tell me if you've ever slept in a separate room from your partner, your husband, wife, anything like that.
Speaking of duvets and bedding, the next thing that...
And you get to spread out the full bed as well. We have both have a queen size bed, king size bed. It's so spacious and enjoyable, really.
It's really important that you should try, that we all do in Sweden, is that we have a duvet cover and a duvet inner and a sheet to make our bed. We don't have any top sheets. We don't have any blankets. That is absolutely disgusting. Sorry, but it is because you don't really wash them as often. You need to have a duvet if it's cold in your country, and you need to put the duvet inside of the duvet cover, and then you wash the duvet cover weekly, and this way you have a very clean bed. When I first came to New Zealand, I was taught about the idea of a top sheet, and you sort of put the duvet on top, but you never really encase it. But that means that when you move around throughout the bed, your body will touch the duvet inner, and you simply cannot wash that once a week because it doesn't last as long as if you do that. So absolutely, if you have a duvet inner and it's cold in your country, put a duvet outer on it, and in the summer when it's too warm, you just put the duvet inner away and you just sleep with the duvet outer as a blanket.
Yeah, that's quite confusing. I didn't know there was any other way. When I live in Scotland, I just sleep with the duvet, the sheet on the bed. Here in Malaysia, as I mentioned, because of the heat, I don't even sleep with anything. I just literally sleep on my bed with the sheet over the top of the mattress. That seems like
easy.
Quite
One
different.
of my favorite Swedish sayings is something like, there is no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothing. Very literal
Makes
and
sense.
very Swedish, but as a child this was normally printed on our weekly mailer at kindergarten or at school, which basically meant for our parents to remember to put proper clothing on us because we would be outside all day, no matter the weather. I think most people these days tend to stay inside when it's bad weather outside instead of just going out there, but by putting on proper clothing, it makes it so much easier to be outside in all weathers, and it's so much better for your health to be outside and breathe in the microbiome rather than just staying inside and watching TV.
Yeah,
Another
I agree.
Swedish health hack for you guys. One of the things that I didn't think was weird, but that became obvious to me the moment I moved abroad, was the fact that we don't talk about race. The first time I heard the word Caucasian, I was 20 and living in Japan, and before that I had never heard any of these words, and it's just not something we talk about. Which brings me on to the next point, is that you never have to disclose this information if you, for example, go to the bank or going to the university. And that information is absolutely not necessary for the bank to know when I'm opening my bank account, and frankly, it's ridiculous. So do what the Swedish people do.
Yeah. So is it in Sweden you don't talk about race? I think that's similar in Scotland as well. We just get brought up to treat everybody the same, exactly the same. Treat everybody with respect. Treat them the same way they treat you, or that sort of thing as well. So, yeah, you see in America when everything is about race, actually kind of causes more racism, in my opinion.
I guess. Whilst we're speaking about politically sensitive subjects, let's speak about children. In Sweden, we treat our children with respect and we treat them as already humans, which is something I really, really enjoy and I think everyone should do. Kids don't have to address older people in a certain way. Kids don't really have to act in a certain way. Kids are really allowed to be kids, which means they're allowed to make mistakes. They're allowed to be upset. They don't have to hug someone if they don't want to. They don't have to kiss someone if they don't want to. Just completely reasonable things that I think every country should adopt. Kids are the best thing in the world, so I absolutely think we should treat kids with the utmost respect.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I've got 2 young children. I've got a boy who's almost 4, a little girl who's almost 1. My boy, so I always treat him just the same as any other human, you know, like always have conversations with him. He always sits at the dinner table and we just treat him like just a normal person. I hate when you see parents, they always try to like treat their kid like as if they're some other type of person, treat them very differently how they would treat anybody else. It's always more healthy just to treat them like, normal people.
Now, this one,
like
I don't know if it's for all of Sweden, but it's definitely something I've experienced a lot of times. But that is people, when I get invited to dinner parties, people ask me, is there something you don't eat? My goodness, this has saved so much trouble having a dinner party or going to a dinner party. I normally tell my best friend when I go to dinners at hers that I don't eat coriander or cilantro because I really, really don't like it. And it makes it a lot easier. One of the most important Swedish traditions is being whole and clean. Now, what does this mean? This is a deeply rooted tradition that goes so far back in Swedish history, but ultimately it means to always present yourself as best as you possibly can. Every time we had friends over, my family would just massively clean the entire house, not because it was necessarily dirty, but it's so important to uphold the standard of being whole and clean in Swedish society. Another thing that I think is crazy that other countries have and that we don't have is that we don't really use the expression from scratch. Growing up, I didn't know that you could buy cake mixes. I had only seen it on TV. I had never really heard of it. I didn't know you could buy any sort of pre-made food or something that we call halvfabrikat, which technically means half-processed foods. Of course, this might differ a little bit, but in general, we don't say that we make things from scratch in Sweden. If you make a cake, you will make it from scratch. That is just how you make a cake. There's no other way to make a cake. You either buy it from the bakery or you make it from scratch. And I think that's also one of the reasons why we are quite a healthy country. One of the best Swedish cultural traditions that you've probably already heard about is Fika. A fika is when you have a coffee, normally, or a tea, with a sweet treat, and you normally have it in the afternoon, but you can actually have it whenever. And this is one of the most common things we do when we go on dates or meet up with our friends. It's so cozy, it's really fun, but I also really like that it's one of the few things in Sweden where you can date someone or meet someone without drinking alcohol. Now, fika means different things in different languages, especially in Italian, so I would use it with caution and use it only when you're in Sweden. Going back to child...
Yeah, that one definitely is something I've learned about with these videos that is right up my street. I definitely have a sweet tooth. I love coffee. I think it's such a great tradition. Tell me, what's the best example of fika you've ever taken part in?
Here, another thing that I really appreciate about Swedish culture that you should try if you have children is co-sleeping. My parents co-slept with me and my brother. Everyone I know, I think, co-slept. My sister co-slept with me or with her parents when she was with them. And I've never ever had any issues, heard any issues, or hear anyone talk badly about co-sleeping. Co-sleeping with your baby makes so much more sense because you don't have to wake up in the middle of the night and go into another room. Also, your baby's brain is not developed enough to know that you're not in the room, which makes it feel unsafe. Co-sleeping is literally the best option for sleeping with your baby. My dad built this really clever little half crib that he put next to the bed with a mattress and made it level to the bed. So I could be in the bed, co-sleeping there at the same time as my mom was in the bed. Co-sleeping shouldn't be a term, I don't think. It shouldn't be a trend. It shouldn't be an idea. It should just be the most common way for sleeping with your baby. Another thing
that's interesting again, especially as I mentioned, because I've got a young baby, or a young toddler. She is now almost 1. She still sleeps in the same room as my wife. I was more of the sort of view that they should be put into their own room like sooner rather than later, just get them become more independent, get them used to that environment. And we did that for our son maybe after a year and a half. So we kind of co-slept for a year and a half, but then we kind of just agreed they go in their own room and then actually settle very quickly. I think children are very adaptable. I think they can sleep on their own in their own room. But yeah, the one when they're very young, I think it's important to stay in the same room.
Is common in Sweden but isn't very common abroad is that both men and women call themselves feminists. In Sweden, people are generally more educated about feminism than in other countries, and I really like that we use the word more casually and without so much attachment to it that comes from other countries. A weird thing about Sweden that I thought was a bit quite strange is that our school is a lot easier than any other school in the world. Now, I don't know exactly how accurate this is, but I know that in general in Sweden, we are very educated. However, our school, especially I think middle school and preschool, is a lot easier than, for example, in England or in New Zealand. We have way less assignments, way less homework, but somehow it still works. Unfortunately, this trend is changing and we're becoming a bit more like the rest of the world, but I really think homework is ridiculous and we shouldn't have it. So that's that.
Yeah, tell me if you agree with that. I'm not sure if I agree with it. Like for me, like growing up in the UK, school was not exactly tough, but I guess we didn't really have anything to compare it to. We just got by and worked hard and things like that. There was a lot of homework, a lot of assignments. I don't see any problem with that. I mean, my son, as I mentioned, he's almost 4, but he goes to kindergarten. He already gets homework. Although we now live in Asia, so they have a very different educational system. Theirs is a bit more hard. I think UK is fine. Sweden, tell me what you think about the Swedish education system.
One weird thing we do in Sweden, but I think we shouldn't do, so disregard this one, is that we don't really date. Although I'm Swedish, I've never dated a Swedish guy because I think I've only had 2 Swedish guys ever hit on me in my entire life. But in general, we don't really date. We don't really have a period of dating where you can see other people, or normally you're just sort of not together and then you're sort of together. Dating in Sweden is very weird. That is why I've been so unsuccessful at it. And yeah, I find it a bit uncomfortable. And I think Sweden, in fact, should adopt how people date in other countries.
Is that true for everybody?
Way more sense, and it's a much more adult way of dating. Something we do in Sweden is that we learn English very early. This also makes so much sense because it's easier to learn a language when you're young. And voila, most people speak English, which is such a useful skill to have if you want to live in another country or have any job where you don't work in Sweden. All right, so we're going even more political. Time for religion. One thing we don't do in Sweden is we're not really religious or go to church, even though Wikipedia might say otherwise. So this has changed since then, but when I grew up and my entire generation, we couldn't choose to be enrolled in the Swedish church system. That just happened automatically when we were born, no matter if we were baptized or not. We just went straight into the Swedish church system, which is also the system you have to be in if you want to be buried in a churchyard, or if you want to be married in a church, if you want to get baptized in a church, etc., etc. So this is a quite fun fact compared to other countries, because if you look at Wikipedia, it says most Swedish people are religious, but that's simply because we are enrolled in church. Now, say what you want about religion, but I, for one, am a person who thinks that we should practice what we preach, and since most people have lots of sex before marriage, drink a ridiculous amount of alcohol, and do all other sorts of gluttonous things, I think it makes complete sense that most people don't go to church. I remember going to church in kindergarten for our summer ending, and I remember my priest had leather pants and played a rock and roll guitar, which we all thought was very, very fun. We are a land of wonderful and quirky, weird, strange traditions. In Sweden, we have something called...
Yeah, tell me more about that. What is the current state of religion, or how do people follow religion in Sweden? Is it really going lower every year? I think it's probably the same in the UK. The younger generations are just probably more agnostic rather than anything else, maybe atheist, but when I grew up, I really never knew anybody that went to church, anything like that. My children are not religious. I wouldn't force them to be anything they don't want to be. If they want to become religious when they're older, I've got no problem with that as well. But yeah, interestingly, I never knew that from birth, just automatically assigned a religion in Sweden. That's interesting.
Called Jantelagen, which practically means be humble, but also never talk well about yourself. So there are pros and cons about this law. It's an unwritten law, but one of the good things about it is that Swedish people are in general very comfortable and quiet, or maybe better is to say not loud people. So it's very nice to be around Swedish people. No one ever yells, no one ever tries to really be the center of attention, no one really, speaks really loudly. One of my favorite things we do in Sweden, which does not work in English, is that we don't really have a word for please. Now you can use snälla, which means like most kindly, or can you kindly, or you can use tack, which means thank you, but we don't really have a word for please. I love learning languages because this is those little parts about a language and a culture that you won't really learn unless you know the language. So I love speaking English, I love using the word please, but I also love speaking Swedish and being able to sneak in a tack or a snälla where Swedish people normally don't and sound like the most friendly and polite person in the world. So it's a win-win. So, okay, my friends, I did not think we'd go this political. I have written this video down. It's very funny because when I translate these very regular Swedish ideas to English, they suddenly become so much more political. Swedish people are in generally extremely nice, and it's such a nice culture to live in, and I think that's why so many people move back to Sweden when they want to have a family, because it's such a safe and reasonable and wholesome place for kids to grow up. And part of that is because these lovely and quirky ideas that we have. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I had so much fun speaking about my Swedish traditions.
Yeah, tell me what you think about that. So that's weird things Swedish people do. I think it's actually a lot are just very sensible things to do, very good things. Tell me what you think about them. Is there anything you disagree with on that list, or that you don't relate to for any reason? For me, very interesting, great to learn more about Sweden, Swedish traditions and the Swedish way of life. Recommend more videos about Sweden and I'll check them out soon. Thanks.